Hello, and welcome to a rare Wednesday edition of the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast here on Hawk Fanatic. I am Rob Howe, joined as always by Scott Dochterman from The Athletic. It is Wednesday, February the 8th, 2023, little after 9 a.m., about 9:15 a.m. Central Time. And we had to kind of rearrange things for a scheduling conflict. But as Scott and I were talking about before we started recording, never a dull moment around here, and there's always something to talk about, right, Scott?
Yeah, it just never seems to end. I mean, it's in Iowa football. I wrote about it today that for like 10 months of the year, it takes the spotlight. And then it usually just kind of moves off for about a 6 to 8 week window and lets kind of the winter sports take center stage, and then kind of moves back in with spring football. This year, it's just kind of it's like warm jello. It's all over everything. It's just never going to allow anything else to take the center stage in Iowa. And this isn't a good thing either. This isn't like, hey, we just got a bunch of great recruits or something. This is a mess it created and continues to linger.
Yes, it is. As we both use the analogy before starting to record, it's kind of like just pull the Band-Aid off instead of like easing it off and making it painful and pulling hair out and all the other stuff that comes with that. And Iowa just didn't do that. And it's done with now. Some of the talk, as you said, during this offseason has been good talk, picking up offensive linemen and a receiver and quarterback, a tight end, and the transfer portal, 2 quarterbacks. Having a pretty good recruiting class. But the elephant in the room since during the season, if not before, was Brian Ferentz in the offense. And that's where we're at again, the first week of February. And for those that have, literally been under a rock, we had Kirk Ferentz the writing was on the wall last week, Scott, when he said he didn't anticipate any coaching changes. He left the door open a crack, but smart minds knew that Brian was coming back at that point. I mean, maybe Kelton Copeland moves on or somebody else on the staff moves on, but most likely Brian was back. And then they follow that up Monday, February the 6th, with the press release that Brian is having his salary reduced, but has benchmarks to reach to get that money back and then some. I wrote about this. And we talked about this again before recording. I think from a PR standpoint, from a public, just from a reactionary standpoint, would have been better to just do all of that last week rather than having shots fired at your program Wednesday of last week and then 5 days later on Monday. It didn't seem like the best approach.
No. I mean, that's why there's always that, 4:58 press release that most institutions have on a Friday is to get the news out before the weekend. So then by Monday, it's kind of, just a gas in the wind,
Yeah.
In this case, it gave it some serious oxygen that you really wouldn't want as a program. Had this happen all on, say, Wednesday, that this is the way it's going to be. Wednesday, there are going to be benchmarks. Here are the benchmarks, and here's why. And it's on signing day, and then Iowa didn't really have anything of newsworthy notes, but other programs did. So then nationally, it's a story, it's a storyline, it's something people talk about, but it doesn't linger out there. By waiting 5 days, and being kind of attached to the national narrative at some point, there wasn't really anything to talk about. And holy cow, are you kidding me? Now Iowa becomes center stage for an issue it created and continues to perpetuate. And it just, and then the low benchmarks, 25 points a game, that's, it's ridiculous. And I think people, Iowa fans rightly are upset. And I think they've now, again, put itself in a position to be a laughingstock, which it's been for a long time, which is a really shame. You think about the cameo videos by Bob Stoops and Fran McCaffrey. You think about, just everything throughout the fall, what happened in the first game against South Dakota State and on and on and on. And it's in the same position it is simply because of the personnel it chooses to keep.
Yeah, and we don't know the particulars. We don't know if Brian tried to leave and couldn't leave. We don't know if, what he said last season that he doesn't, I don't remember if it was you that asked him about, the idea of him resigning. And he's saying that, I don't want to run away from a challenge. My guess is there are multiple storylines and factors at play here as to why he is back. The number one reason he is back is because his father wants him back. And I do believe his dad thinks he can do it. And I don't know. I mean, he doesn't have a lot of people in agreement with him on that. But basically, what Kirk has told us now, Scott, is I believe that the issues on offense the last two seasons were mainly personnel related.
Yep. And that's what he said. And that's really not going over well with the fan base, because any other school that ranked 130th in total offense and averaged 17 points a game and whatever, they would make changes, not only to the personnel, which they did. They went to the portal and they did a good job there, I think. But they'd also change the scheme. They changed the people in charge of the scheme. They would look at different options, and Iowa has continuously doubled down. They doubled down last year when they moved Brian to quarterbacks coach. Now it's like, well, we're gonna just bring the whole gang back again, and it's really tough for people to understand because they look around them and they look and they see changes everywhere else. Every single rival in the Big Ten and in state have made changes. You look at Iowa State had a real similar offensive season. They fired Tom Manning. They elevated Nate Shieldhouse, and they brought in some people, and they're going to do things differently. Kirk Soraka left Minnesota. There were coaching changes in Nebraska and Minnesota across the board, and Wisconsin and North Nebraska. Good God, I'm missing everybody.
Keep track of all the changes in the Big Ten West.
Right. Illinois lost its defensive coordinator to Purdue, who lost its head coach. Northwestern hired a new offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator. I'm sorry. I'm all over the place here today. But there's just so much change. And Iowa is the one that really could use it and won't have it. Because you look at the defense, we all know it. And it's really been a shame all year long that the defense was elite. It was the best yards per play in the Big Ten since 2007. It was the best at Iowa since 1981. It led the country only over the last 10 years. Only Alabama had equaled it, not even exceeded it, but equaled it. And Iowa had to play two teams in the playoffs, and Iowa didn't have the luxury of playing its own offense, unlike Illinois and everybody else.
Yeah.
So it had an amazing season defensively, yet the narrative isn't about how great the defense was. It's about the offense and the offensive woes. And now that's going to continue again in the offseason. So when you mention Kirk bringing back his son, I think that he's right for the most part, that it was the challenges, the personnel on offense that really caused him to be that bad. But when you start to bring back your son, and the reason why he's there and the reason why he's supervised by somebody other than Kirk is because he's his son, that it begs the question that, Pat brought up, and I think other people is he putting his own and his family's self-interest ahead of that of the program? And it's a really fair question that at this point, you can't argue against it.
And it's something that we all saw the potential of, that it could happen when he hired Brian. And, it was pretty smooth sailing for a while there. Obviously, there's going to be a certain amount of criticism when you're son of the head coach, whether it's Connor and Patrick McCaffrey playing for their father or Brian coaching for his father. And there's going to be just some inherent criticism there. But this we're at is kind of the worst case scenario now, because we're keeping doubling down here. So last year it was, he's going to be the quarterback coach. We're going to streamline things, and we're going to simplify things, and everything's going to be easier and look better. And that didn't happen. And now we got to this point, and now we're being told that it was personnel and not coaching or scheme. This is it, Scott. I mean, if it doesn't work this fall, it's going to blow up, because where else do you go at this point? What else can you pinpoint or put the blame on other than Brian if it doesn't work this fall?
You can't. And I think, Gary Barta deserves a lot of heat over a lot of different things, and including somewhat this, but Kirk Ferentz has higher profile than he does on campus. If he would have tried to fire Brian last week, then it would have gotten to a comparing contest that he would have lost. He would have gotten fired first. That people would have, if it comes down between he and Kirk, he's the one out. But Kirk putting him in this spot, Gary's the one taking all the heat, even more than Kirk is for this, because Kirk is generally well-liked, certainly respected, has a legacy career, and he has a long-term contract that, will pay him $48 million that you just can't just get out of. I mean, you could try, but you just can't unload that. And really, why would you want to? Because even last year was a down year and they were 8-5. I mean, it wasn't like they were, 5-7 or something like that. So he put Gary in a really tough spot. So I think, to Gary's credit, he needed to get a win, and he got a little bit of one where he stopped the 2-year rollover. He cut his pay down a little bit and got some sort of concession. Was it a lot? No, it wasn't a lot at all. I mean, $50,000, to $850 rather than $9. I mean, he would have actually had to pay him $972,000 based on the 8% raise for reaching a bowl game. So there, it really was more like $122,000 pay cut than a $50,000 pay cut. That said, not being able to get this done by last week's press conference really put them in a tough spot. And by Kirk doubling down on Brian, no matter what, it's like, I want to ensure that Brian succeeds under any and all costs. And I'm willing to put my own stake and my own legacy out there for this. And I do see a scenario where they succeed this fall. I'm not saying that they're going to be what they were in 2020, where they averaged 32 points a game, but I can see them getting into 28 plus. Their schedule shows that that's probably likely. They would be surprised if it doesn't. And I would put them as the West Division favorite. So it's like, it's not inconceivable where they get 10 or 11 wins this year. But is that settling, Rob? Is that saying, yeah, we could reach this benchmark and we can make it look like we're doing great, when you've got an obvious defense that if it goes to Indianapolis with that defense, it's going to keep you in that game. But do you have an offense and a scheme that matches? Is that settling? Is it saying, oh, well, as long as we get to a C level on offense and our defense is an A, we'll get to Indy. We'll win 10 or 11 games. We'll get to a good bowl game. That's the tough part, because and is that the ceiling for Iowa anyway? I don't know. So that's where we are right now, and that's what makes this all a major challenge.
7 wins, that benchmark has kind of been the Kirk Ferentz, Gary Barta benchmark. When Kirk signed an extension, whenever that was, he had that benchmark. That was that 2015 or 16, where he had it, each year he got to 7, he got guaranteed money, on that. I'm not going to do a good job of explaining what it is. But anyway, getting to 7 wins earned him guaranteed money moving forward in his contract, the last deal. And as I wrote in my column the other day, Iowa won 18 combined games, that being 9 games a season the last 2 years with this offense.
Mm-hmm.
So Iowa, as Scott said, could win 9 or 10 games this year with a bad offense again. And it doesn't solve anything. Because are you reaching, as you said, are you reaching your ceiling? It's fair to wonder, are you wasting a defense and special teams that could make you a playoff contender? Certainly a New Year's 6-day contender.
Yeah.
And, that's to me. And, another side tentacle to this, Scott, is they got rid of Ken O'Keefe. He retired, whatever the case was, however it went down. He was making whatever, $500,000 a year. So they bring in Abdul Hodge. I don't know what he's making, but now you've got Judd Budmeier, another coach, to help with your offensive coordinator who hasn't coached quarterbacks before. So you got to keep an eye on that too. It's not, again, I think it speaks to, Scott, Kirk Ferentz is doing everything he can to help his son succeed. Would he do this if the person was John Smith?
Or Greg Davis or Ken O'Keefe.
Or Ken O'Keefe, right.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the hallmark of nepotism here, that this is why there are laws in place. And I'm not going to suggest, we're just talking about the optics, if nothing else. Yeah. And that is, would he have done this for anybody else? Probably not. I don't see that for anybody else. And you're doing so much to try to prop your son's career up. And the flip side of this is, I think Brian is an outstanding coach. I think he knows the game at a level that I'll never know it. And I think he's got very much a capable mind of being successful. Now, as this is an offensive coordinator, I don't think that's the case. I think as an offensive line coach, absolutely it is. I think if it's a running game coordinator, I think he's really underrated in that regard. However, we brought this up before, Rob, and that is, just some of the stuff that, to me, the red zone is where scheme really comes into play. Your limitations are obvious in the middle of the field. You don't have somebody who can stretch the field. You don't have somebody who can separate from defensive backs. You don't have an offensive line that can really dominate and get you chunk plays. But when you're bunched together, that's when play calling comes about. That's when the red zone, that's when inside the 10-yard line really comes to fruition. And either they are so obscenely risk averse that they're playing for a field goal every time, or they're scared to death, or they just don't have the play calling acumen to stretch the field enough. But when you're throwing the ball, when you're inside the 10-yard line and you get 38 plays and you have 38 yards on those 38 plays, and you throw 3 total passes all year to the end zone, scoring plays, and you have those 2 tight ends that are NFL caliber tight ends, including one that Brian referred to as the best player he's ever coached, that's on you. That's on the offensive coordinator. That's on the scheme. That's on the play calling. And so to me, that's where it's been. I think, they could have gotten 4 to 5 more touchdowns. And if they do, they win against Illinois, they win against Iowa State. And, and if they beat Illinois, simply Illinois alone, they're in Indianapolis. Now, there is the big divide to me. They can get to Indianapolis this year. I'm not saying without breaking a sweat, but I think they are the favorite. And I think they win 9 or 10 games, even with a bad offense. However, how do you bridge the gap in Indianapolis? How do you not go there and lose 42-3 or 42-20? How, like this year's Michigan game, 27-14. How do you make it so in the final 5 minutes you're playing Ferentz ball and it's a 3-point game one way or the other? That's what they need to really focus on. Can they do that against an elite level opponent like Ohio State or Michigan? I don't know that they have the offense to do that. And I don't know that they have the scheme, the play calling, and the coordination to do that. And that's where it's frustrating, because they had the defense to not only get there, but if they're playing Michigan with that defense, like this year, let's face it, they gave up 20 points. The last touchdown was garbage, and it was a goal line situation. Their offense put them in that position. So if they're playing Michigan with that defense and they give up 20 points, can the offense get 21, 24, even 17? Not that lot last year. This year, but I don't know. So that to me is what is most frustrating.
Puts a lot of pressure on the aforementioned personnel too, including Cade McNamara. Not that that's a bad thing, and he seems like somebody who's willing to embrace that. Someday we'll get to talk to him, but from what I've heard from him, he's very confident that this will work. We'll see. I mean, we had Alex Padilla talking, a little over a year ago about the difficulty of this offense and learning it. And McNamara has, college experience that helps coming from another college. But will they be able to, put four heads together? Kirk, Bryan, Budmeyer, McNamara. Will the four of those guys be able to come up with something here that's at least able to better complement defense and special teams? That's really kind of a wait and see, because I don't think any of us we can sit here and say, yeah, we think it's going to work, or no, we don't think it's going to work. But there's enough change where it's really hard to predict. But if you're going off history and odds makers were making betting lines here, I think a lot of people would bet against this working. So Kirk Ferentz again has to prove people wrong. He's done it in the past. We'll see if he can do it again.
He does it really well. And this is why I don't want to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here. I think he's an outstanding coach. I think he's a Hall of Fame coach. And I've said it before a ton of times that I've never seen a coach that's better in adverse situations, bouncing back, backs against the wall. This is going to fail. Oh my God, they're done. And boom, they come up with a big right hand, Rocky Balboa, or I guess it'd be left hand Rocky Balboa. and wow, they won, or wow, they came back. I mean, last year, 3-4 after a 54-10 loss at Ohio State, that team looked like it was destined for the boneyard. It looked like 3-9 And instead, they won 5 out of the last 6, and really they would have won the last game, if they didn't have just a shit ton of injuries. Not having Sam Laporta in the lineup, Spencer Petras going down after a rough start. Cobra DeJean could have, losing him was massive. All that being said, then they would have been 8-4, lost in Indianapolis, 8-5, and then probably, then maybe the same spot they were in when they went to Nashville. And that would have been fine. And so they would have been 9-5. But all of this being said, there are 2 other people in the room that they've got to be very, very conscious of. And to me are really wild cards and unpredictable. And that is the coaching prowess of George Barnett and Kelton Copeland. You look at George Barnett, he's been there 2 years. They have a lot of faith in him. They haven't done anything up front. Now, that could be the cards he's been dealt. That could be really young line other than Tyler Linderbaum 2 years ago and Kyler Schott, who was hurt. He's had a lot of injuries. He's had inexperience. They're really trying their best. They're not quite ready yet. And they're thrown out there and they're struggling. And maybe this is the year that the fruits of his labor come through. Plus adding Rusty Feth, great name, by the way, and great beer. Dejon Parker, who has the starter kit that you're exactly looking for in a tackle. And, Kirk talked him up last week. It's really possible that, all right, that trio of then sophomores, next year juniors, play their ass off, and they're much improved. And then you throw on the 2 newcomers, and Okay, this line looks exactly what you want it to look like. You look at the outside, and Kelton Copeland has a track record. At times, it looks okay when you had Brandon Smith and Amir Smith-Marset, but 4 out of your 5 that you brought to Indianapolis, top 5 transferred. They did. They went out and they all went to major universities. Tyrone Tracy and Charlie Jones went to Purdue. Keegan Johnson went to K-State. Arlen Bruce went to Oklahoma State. That says something about the offense. It says something about you too, because they're not, only Nico Ragaini is the one that's sticking around. So you've got to be able to coach some guys up. Maybe now these are more his guys. I don't know. You got a big hand in recruiting and bringing in, Keegan Johnson and Arlen Bruce. So he's going to have the spotlight on him too, and he should. So how those 2 units develop is going to have a big impact on how the meeting of the minds pushes the everything forward.
We'll wrap this discussion on this topic up here soon. One thing that, we talk about public perception, feelings of the fans. Haven't had a chance to read your piece on The Athletic yet, where you are, is it a schizophrenic piece where you're talking to yourself and having 2 different personalities? And is it Sybil-ish?
I guess it could be. It's really what I did was I put 2, I made it like eavesdropping on a conversation between the 2 Iowa fans at a bar. One is kind of your, what they say, a tavern hawk. He loves the Hawks. He watches every game, doesn't really go to the games, didn't go to the university, but I didn't put that in there. The other guy, is more your, polo wearing Hawkeye who donates, who's a donor to both the Swarm and to the foundation, has season tickets, goes to a couple road trips, goes to the bowl games, and they're trying to hash out the Brian Ferentz situation. And the Tavern Hawk type is more on the, why the hell don't they get rid of everybody? This is embarrassing and stuff. And the other guy who does know the staff, is trying to rationalize it, but kind of understands the problems. And it's kind of this back and forth. And so, yeah, I mean, it's schizophrenic. It's probably the right way to describe the Iowa fan right now, and this is, it's why it's hard, it's hard because you're everybody can see that what the detriment is for the Iowa football program. It's offense. Now, they're not going to remove what the fans want to have removed, and that's the offensive coordinator. And so asking them to trust in them again is that's a tough ask. But then there's the people that are like, yeah, but I love this team and I love this program. I've grown up around this program. I can't just quit them. But it's the frustration. And that's why, even last week I wrote, there's anger, there's vitriol, but they better watch it, or it could become apathy. It could be like basketball, which I dare say is, that I don't know that they'll ever recover from that. From the Alford years to the Licklider years and the first year of BTN when it was out of sight, out of mind. And they just, hey, they're not any good. The weather sucks. I don't feel like going down there. They're not going to win. They're not fun. And they learn to live without it. And if people are that way on Saturdays, oh my God, for football, it could get really, really bad very, very quickly. So they're dancing on the edge on this one. And I think they've got to be very, very careful.
Yeah, I think it's the first time since I've been around here doing this that I thought apathy would be possible with Iowa football. Mm-hmm. I never really entertained that possibility, but I can see it now. I still think there's a ways to go before we get to that point. Mm-hmm. But it could happen quickly like it did in basketball. And I think sometimes we overreact to what we see maybe on social media and reaction from people. But I've seen some pretty level-headed fans, at least people I consider level-headed fans on social media, almost insinuate or suggest that they're rooting against Brian Ferentz reaching those benchmarks. That's not a healthy spot to be in.
Yeah. And that's why you've become kind of a laughing stock, like the drive for 325 and rooting against this, like, oh, if I'm the defense, I intercept the ball. And if I have a clear field, I take a knee, make Brian earn that on his own. And that's kind of the feeling right now. And it's understandable. And the problem isn't so much, the widespread apathy. And I think, again, basketball hit it because basketball, in Licklider's 3 years, they were 38 and 58, and they were 4 and 14 or whatever it was in the Big Ten. That's different.
Let it be noted that Scott is the one that made you guys think of the Todd Licklider error.
Yeah.
Error.
Error.
Today, it was not Rob. I did not bring up Lick. I completely agree with the comparison.
And football's not there, and it's not going to, it'll never be there. I mean, even if they go 2-10, that's not going to be there because it wasn't that way in 1999 either. But where the problem is, it's more of a stair step. It's the guy who has 4 season tickets decides, what, we'll just cut back to 2. And if we want to go, fine. Or the guy who has, or family guy, whatever, I'm just using guy generally, has 2 tickets and goes, you know what, maybe we'll just cut to one of those 3 packs this year instead of going to every game. Or the person who decides, you know what, we'll just give them up and then we'll buy them on YouTube or scalp them or whatever. That's where the danger lies. Is last year every ticket was sold and they were happy. Hey, season tickets, student tickets, whatever. And
that was after a bad offense in 2021.
Exactly. And I think that was kind of the bump from COVID, in some ways, because in 2021, it was exciting. They struggled a little bit early. There were some people who didn't renew because of COVID. And then they, were very exciting and they got to Indianapolis and, hey, we're excited again to be fans. I think in this case, it could just be that stair step. Now, there's going to be 75% of the people will remain exactly the way they are. They'll be mad, they'll be aggravated, they'll chirp, but they'll still continue to buy season tickets because football is different than any other sport because it's an all-day experience. And there's nothing on this planet, in this part of the world, that's like a Saturday in Kinnick in early October, late September, a night game when it's nice out and you're tailgating all day. It's the same way in Ames, same way around the country. And so people are willing to say, you know what, I'm aggravated, but I like Kirk, I like winning, I like the environment, I love my friends and family. But then there's that 25% factor that may just slope a little bit. And then getting them back is kind of difficult. And you're talking about, in football, a couple $1 million. If they don't sell out for Utah State, Western Michigan, Purdue, Illinois, just those games, that's where it gets tough. And, this year's schedule is not the same as last year's. When you have an automatic in Iowa State, and you have Michigan, and you have Wisconsin, even Nebraska, you don't have that when you have Purdue, Michigan State, Illinois, Western Michigan. The Minnesota is kind of your keynote game. That's going to be tough, and so they've got to go out and try to sell this. And and the thing is, Rob, we're more skeptical than we were even last year. Whether it's me and I'll just say me, that I thought last year the offensive line would be much better. I thought they struggled in 2021, 2022. They're going to come back. They're going to be better. They're going to be able to run the ball. Maybe the passing game will still limp a little bit, but at least they'll be able to run the ball. And they couldn't do that. So now it's like, all right, I'm not going to go to Kids Day and think, wow, this is great. This is so much better. Then maybe I'll be on the other side and I'll be more skeptical than I need to be. But that's the position that they put us in.
Yeah, and I don't think that public opinion is going to be swayed much by anything that is said during the next 6 or 7 months. I think a lot of people are going to be, all right, well, this is what you're giving us. Let's show us that it's going to work.
Yeah,
we're done hearing about it's going to work, and Cade McNamara is going to save the day. And I don't want to put too much pressure on that kid either.
Yeah.
I don't think that's fair. But I think a lot is going to be put on him. And again, he seems like has the personality to accept that and embrace it. But getting out there and actually doing it and, maybe going 3 and out on the first and second series, and now you're hearing boos at Kinnick Stadium. You could say that stuff doesn't affect you, and maybe it doesn't, but there are things like that that can have a snowball effect.
Yeah, no question. I mean, he did a nice job at Michigan, but even Iowa's offense is not Michigan's offense. I mean, maybe they play a similar style, but the people that they have there, I mean, think about the running backs that he had, Hassan Haskins and Blake Corum. They're, Caleb Johnson's a really good prospect. I think he'll be a really good running back. I am not putting him in that category yet. The only area where Iowa was the equal or better was tight end. The offensive line won the Joe Moore Award when he was there. He completed 64% of his passes, but their receivers are better than Iowa's receivers. He was 15-6, touchdown to interception. That's probably what you're looking for from Iowa, considering what everything's at right now. So, he's got a ways to go, and yeah, maybe and then we'll notice if scheme. How does scheme limit him? Does it limit him? Does it allow him to do more? I think it's probably like, Spencer had his limitations, no question. But I think with bringing in a new guy, I think they're going to give him more leeway to do kind of what he wants to do or what he likes to do. Kind of like if, business, as we know, sometimes you bring in the new guy and you just let him, hey, this is your chance to kind of make your mark and do the things you want to do. And then we'll kind of work around you, but there again, you put a lot of, he threw for 184 yards a game, 2 years ago. Michigan was 228 because they still had J.J. McCarthy also chiming in once in a while. So I think they've got a lot to consider.
And we'll have a lot to talk about in that regard once we roll around. We'll be talking about it every week. Who am I fooling? But we'll have more data and observations in the spring. Hopefully get a couple times to talk to him and see him perform and get an idea of kind of what it looks like. But really, we're not going to know until we hit the fall what Iowa has. And like I told people in my column, hope for the best. Really, you do want this to work out. Don't root against Brian Ferentz and your team. That drives me crazy when teams, they want guys to fail. So they want teams to fail so the coaches will be fired and change comes about that way. It's just a weird way of looking at it from my perspective, but maybe that's just me. I want to let folks know that support for the podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That's sui.org, Systems Unlimited. Thank you so much to them for their support. We're going to hear from a few more sponsors now, and Scott and I will be back on the other side to talk about baseball, or at least the baseball stadium.
You're back on the side. I'm on the podcast?
Yes.
Why? When did I talk?
I'll edit it out.
What is it? Are you talking to myself?
It's recording. That mic is picking up what you're saying, and Scott hears you too.
What am I saying?
You're talking. Where are you going?
Hi, Scott.
Hi, how's it going?
He said, hi, how's it going? Okay, we are back here on the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast. If you could hear what happens during the breaks, but you're probably not going to hear that today. Scott, we got some news yesterday. I think it was speculated about prior to it, but finalization yesterday. Early November in Wrigley Field, Iowa and Northwestern. Yeah, I'm selfish in these situations sometimes because I think about how it's going to affect me. And the thought of being in Wrigley Field in November off the lake shooting photos is both a cool thought and a cold thought.
Well, yeah, is it worse, Rob, though, than Ryan Field? Because it's not that far from the lake either.
Yeah, probably not. It seems like there might be a little bit more cover there. But I've definitely had some dicey weather at Ryan Field as well. So it's Big Ten weather in November. I get that. We'll see. But it's a cool idea. Tickets will be tough to come by, I'm sure. And it'll be a good experience it'll be a better experience for the Iowa players than was the Pinstripe Bowl.
Yeah,
even though they won the Pinstripe Bowl.
Yeah, the field, I think the field conditions will be better, meaning it won't be frozen.
Yes,
an
ice rink.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot there that they can look forward to. I mean, I think this is a great opportunity. And what's really unfortunate about this, Rob, is it came just after all the stuff with Brian, that it really doesn't have its own separation of a wow factor. This is cool, because this is something that I think everybody's kind of looked forward to once Northwestern did this in 2010 with Illinois and then brought it back in 20. It was going to do it with Wisconsin, but then we had the COVID year, so they didn't play there. And then in 21, they did it with Purdue. And it was kind of like, man, is Iowa ever going to get in this rotation? Does Iowa ever have a chance to do this? And the fact that they are, I think, is really going to be neat. And to play at Wrigley Field, an iconic venue in the Midwest where there are a ton of Iowa fans in the Chicagoland area, and it's not that far from Iowa for that matter, I think is really exciting. And, the views are going to be skewed a little bit. It's Wrigley Field. I think you can accept that. The one, the thing is, it's kind of interesting is it would be like Game 7 of the World Series. So, and because I'm wearing my Cubs 2016 sweatshirt today, that would be, if you're an Iowa fan and God comes down and says, they're either going to be playing at home for Game 7 of the World Series at Wrigley Field, and the game gets moved back to Ryan Field football game, or forget it, you're just going to play that football game. You're putting Iowa fans' hearts in a tough spot. But overall, I don't think any Iowa/Cub fans are going to say, that's really going to happen this year. This is not the year if you want to bet on it.
No, I don't think the Cubs are positioned to be in that situation.
No, I think this is probably a
good year. The game is safe.
Yeah, I think this is a good year. This is probably why it wouldn't have happened 4 or 5 years ago when there was actually an opportunity for this to go. But what's funny is I was looking this up, and in 1904 was the last time Iowa played a Big Ten team in a baseball stadium, and that was Minnesota at Athletic Park in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So, and in 1899 they played Illinois in a baseball park in Rock Island, and they played Nebraska, which wasn't a Big Ten team at the time, in Omaha in a baseball stadium. And the odd part about when I looked up 1899 is Iowa was 8-0-1. It allowed 11 total points that year, and the offense averaged 24.6 points per game.
Yeah. It all comes together. It's all tied together. It's like,
yeah. But where the asterisk lies, Rob, is the touchdowns were only 5 points back then.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how many they had. I'd have to look a little harder and probably not get that information. But if I had that, maybe they were over the 25 quarter anyway.
This is, if I remember correctly, they'll have the teams on opposite sidelines, right? Unlike Fenway Park, where they have the teams on the same sideline and it's like awkward. I
don't know. I know the first time they did have them on the same. I don't know about the second time though. That's going to be interesting to find out a little bit more of the details.
Fitz and Ferentz standing next to each other at midfield, arguing with the official.
Well, it's not like Northwestern has to, well, it gives them an advantage. They already know what play's coming.
Yeah. Both teams know.
Yeah, I know.
Both teams know what play's coming.
Yeah.
But yeah, it adds a little spice to this season because, as you said, it's not as attractive as a schedule in terms of marquee games. Battle for Floyd at home, game at Penn State, game at Iowa State. I don't know. Are there any other home games that really stand out?
Michigan State's probably the biggest one.
Yeah, and that's
They play Rutgers at home in November. Rutgers and Illinois are the November games. Purdue, but not without Jeff Brom. That doesn't really have a lot of sizzle. So this is kind of a meh schedule. And, and the one thing I do love about this, and I proposed it a few years ago, that Illinois, before Illinois got to be anything decent, was they should move the game to Garrett's Great Stadium, where the White Sox play, because of this type of thing. Because if you look at Iowa, and we all know this, with 9 Big Ten games and Iowa State, there is no variety in their schedule, unless they decide, well, we're going to play 10, 11 Power 5 opponents, and they're not going to do that. And they're because they are a moneymaker. They made $151 million last year. That they're going to want to have 7 home games. They need that. They need to repay their loans to the university. So that's kind of stuck Iowa in a really rough spot to, hey, let's open up the season against LSU and Houston, or Chicago against Notre Dame. And actually now, all right, well, there's something different, unique, spicy. It's Northwestern. It's their home game, but it's at Wrigley Field. It's different. And it's something I think fans can look forward to. But Iowa's kind of not totally embraced it.
Yeah, I think the eating, drinking establishments around Wrigley probably cheered loudly when they heard the noise that Iowa fans were coming during the off season, when baseball's not happening and business isn't as crisp. It will be that weekend.
Oh yeah, Murphy's bleachers will be packed, and the Cubby Bear, and all every Wrigleyville and the Zachary across the street. So I'm looking forward to it, Bob. I think it's going to be great. I think it's going to be fun, and I know you. I hope it's not a dreadful day, but and then doubling up, because this is my woes of being a fan. The Bears played there until 1971. It was the most played stadium. I think Lambeau just passed it, not very long ago. More NFL games were played there until Lambeau 3 years ago or something like that. So, the first NFL championship game took place there in 1933. The Bears NFL title in 63 took place there. Gale Sayers, 6 touchdown game in 65. So there's a lot of NFL history that goes along on that field as well. And Papa Bear Hallis and Dick Butkus and things. So I'm a nerd for that stuff. So I'm kind of amped for it.
Yeah, it should be fun. Looking forward to that rolling around. And I'm sure it'll be met well by fans looking to spend a lot of money in Chicago. And we'll see if Iowa has an additional linebacker for that game, Scott. If we're waiting on Nick Jackson. It is now February 8th. His last tweet was February 5th, thanking the fans at Virginia for his time there. And he is now deciding between Oklahoma and Iowa. It looks like Iowa's chances are very good in this situation, but you never know with recruiting. Strange things happen, especially now in this NIL era. That's ERA. Not like Lickliter, error.
The baseball part of us, right? Coming out, error.
But they can really use this kid, Scott. We've talked about the linebacker position, and that's not to, look poorly upon some of the younger guys we haven't seen yet. But if you can bring in a productive veteran like this and plug and play after losing Seth Benson and Jack Campbell, 2 all Big Ten players from your second level of the defense, you do it.
Yeah, let's be real that nobody's going to be Jack Campbell, and that includes Nick
Right.
Jackson. If he comes, he's just the best linebacker Iowa's ever had, ever, even over Larry Station. He's the best. Just kind of like Tyler Linderbaum was the best center Iowa ever had. No matter who replaces him, they can try to be as good, but they're not going to be as good. That said, you can have a good player there, an NFL caliber player or a high level college player, and produce similar stats and feel pretty good about yourselves. And I think that's what Nick Jackson would bring. I mean, a 2-time second team all ACC tackler, what led the ACC, I think it was 10 and a half tackles per game last year for a really a not very good team. Virginia was not a good team at all. And they had a really rough end. No question, with the shooting on campus and everything, and lost their last two or dropped their last 2 games because of that. They just didn't play them. But he's a plug and play guy, and on a unit that lost its 3 real linebackers. Now Jay Higgins is coming back. Jay is a talented player, and I think he's going to take charge of that. But I think what you're getting, if Nick Jackson comes and it's both of those two side by side, you're getting something in the equivalent of Anthony Hitchens and Seth Benson. And if you can get that kind of production and that kind of play from a unit that will have an outstanding front line and a very good secondary with capability of being outstanding, then I think you're looking at, again, one of the best defenses in the country.
Yeah, and I think, we've seen now that they're much more flexible than they've ever been in terms of playing that cash position. I think Sebastian Castro proved that he's capable and more beyond that, I think, if he gets some more field time. So I don't think Nick Jackson is a must-have. I think they'll be okay if he didn't choose Iowa based on the personnel they have coming back. But it's kind of like Rusty Feth and Dejon Parker on the offensive line. Maybe some of those, you hope that your younger guys take steps forward and, and I think they will, but it gives you kind of a safety net, and at the very least, and the potential for a lot more.
Well, if you're looking at Rusty Feth starting at right guard, and, the difference between him and, say, Bo Stevens, Jennings Dunker, Mike Myslinski, any of those guys is just experience. And if he's plug and play, the other guys build it, maybe you rotate them, on that side of the ball. Maybe you just, just get some guys some snaps. And then the next year is when they step in. That's the way Iowa has always done things. It's always wanted that player that could kind of rotate in and not be overwhelmed. Well, last year they were overwhelmed, and because not only were they inexperienced, but they played 6 out of the top 13 defenses in the country, and then they played their own defense practice once in a while. But last year I went through the numbers, Rob, and 70.5 of their snaps were taken in cash, and 28.6 were in 4-3 and 0.9 and others like goal line and what have you. And that tells me that they have a lot of faith in Sebastian Castro and the way he hits. And now you're looking at the league is changing in its own ways, where Wisconsin, they may still ground and pound it, but they got a different offensive coordinator, Phil Longo. They've got a Tanner Mordecai, who's so they're talking air raid, whether it's air raid or just up tempo passing. It's different. You're going to need passing guys on the field. The other teams are going to be the same way. So I think they're going to be fine there. I think they could play it 80% of the time at a minimum, because Castro hits like a linebacker and he covers the slot like you asked him to. So I feel like they're in a really good spot. And if they have Nick Jackson there, then it means that you don't rely on somebody without any experience, barely any experience stepping in, whether that's Kyler Fisher or one of the younger guys like, Jaden Harrell. I mean, and the best that they can do is be a depth chart guy and be a special teamer, and then say, man, we really want to get them on the field. And maybe they play, and when they do go 4-3 and they see a couple tight ends in the game and, Minnesota or something like that, then, but it doesn't put that much pressure on the unit, because then like we saw in 2020 when they went to Purdue and you had Campbell out with mono, Benson was out, Justin Jacobs was making his first start. I think that was pretty rough.
Yeah, no doubt. And the more bodies you have, the the ability to be versatile on defense and match up with whatever you're facing, as Scott said, whether it's, a passing offense or a more run geared offense. I think there's no downside to getting Nick Jackson. And if somebody like Jaden Harrell or Jennings Dunker or Bo Stevens beats out those guys that come in, all the better. That means they've improved.
Mm-hmm. No question. I mean, my anticipation for the offensive line is I think Mason Richmond will be pretty good. And I think Connor Colby will be good in year 3. And I think Logan Jones has all the gifts you're looking for out of a lineman, a center. It's just putting it all together. And he was thrown together in that. That was head spinning year for him. And then you throw on Rusty. All you really need from Rusty Feth to me is B. Cole Banwart, B. Kyler Schott, Ross Reynolds, a guy who could just step in, be tough, be physical, kind of everybody leans on him and then let him go. And then finally, Dejon Parker, I think it's going to take some time for him to catch up to the technique. But once he does, again, the athletic ability is there. And, I don't want to get everybody all excited. This is what I see. And who's on the right side, who's on the left side, I don't think we should worry about that right now. But I think if you can get those 5 to play, then you're going to see where that's going to first translate is fewer sacks allowed. They had 38 last year. And you're going to see more yards per carry. And you've got a massive, awesome running back, in my opinion, in Caleb Johnson that's capable of getting 12, 13, 1,400 yards if you feed him. And then whatever you get, and then you have good tight ends. You have a quality quarterback. Yeah, the offense is going to average maybe, dare I say, 29 points per game, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, if they put up 60 on Utah State and Western Michigan, and people are going to be focused on that. Oh, look, they're running the score up so Brian can get to his 25 points a game. It's going to be annoying this fall. I know it already, and I'm preparing myself for the paralysis by overanalysis that we'll go through in the fall.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, the first game, they're just it's going to be an ass kicking. I mean, I have Utah State's numbers here. They were 113th in yards per game allowed rushing. They were 108th in yards per carry allowed. Their turnover margin was -9. They actually had committed the most penalties in the country last year per game. So what this is going to be is establishing the line of scrimmage. It's going to be a hot day and Labor Day weekend. Iowa's going to go out and kick the shit out of them. And it's going to be, 45-6 or 3 or 0, even with this defense. And, if I was recommending to Kirk and or Brian or anybody else, no matter what happens, resist the urge to want to shove it in orifices. Just let it go.
Yeah. Don't just let your actions speak for themselves. That's the best way to approach it.
Yeah.
I'm going to take another break here. Got a couple more sponsors we're going to hear from, and we'll be back on the other side to talk some hoops and wrestling and wrap this puppy up. And we're back here on the other side of some commercial breaks on the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast. Where to start? Let's start with the ladies. They're ranked 5th in the country now. Huge game tomorrow night, Thursday, February the 9th. That, I believe, is a 5:30 tip Central Time in Bloomington against second-ranked. That's not second-ranked in the Big Ten. That's second-ranked in the country, Indiana. This is kind of the showdown in the Big Ten that people have been waiting for. I know, Maryland, Michigan, those were games where people really were focused to see how Iowa would do. We're kind of sorting through things as the season's gone on, and it looks like Indiana and Iowa are the two best teams in the league. And now they face off on tomorrow night at 5:30, Big Ten Network, and should be fun, Scott. This is a fun team to watch, and this should be a fun game tomorrow night. The only unfortunate thing is, and we'll talk about this, it seems like they do this far too often. They put, you've got Iowa men playing the number one team in the country at 6:00 and the women 5 versus 2 at 5:30. So basically you have to choose. You can do the picture in picture and flip it back and forth and stuff, but that's kind of annoying. You'd like to be able to watch both games in their entirety.
Yeah, I know. And that's unfortunate. But the good thing is with the women getting a half an hour, that there is enough of a stagger that's really only in the second half that you're going to get a problem.
Yep.
Because you're going to get probably the first close to 15 minutes maybe of women's play, the first quarter and a half, I would say, of the women before the men tip off. And then there'll be halftime. So then you can kind of go over there for 15 minutes, and then there'll be, third quarter and then halftime for there. So you'll be able to get most of that kind of in. That said, let's look at the matchup is incredible. Indiana's 12-1 in the Big Ten. Iowa's 11-1. 2 versus 5. Indiana has been tremendous. I mean, really been. I watched the game against Ohio State a couple weeks ago where Iowa kind of broke Ohio State and then Indiana shattered it. I mean, it was like this barrage of points that nobody would be able to handle or withstand if Indiana was doing that to them. So it's in Assembly Hall. It should be a well-attended game, I would imagine. And, and then they play again at the end of the month, and it's a sold-out game. So, I think there's some really good stuff going on here. And, and you've got the it factor with Caitlin Clark, second in the country in points and assists per game. Last year led this country in both categories. And, Zanano is having a great year as well. And now with McKenna Warnock back, they've got kind of the third piece and Kate Martin, and, they really look like, and Hannah Stolke has played outstanding basketball last couple of weeks. I think she's an ascending player on a trajectory that is really exciting. So, whether or not it's a win or a loss to me is, you want them to win, of course, but I don't think it matters as much in the big picture. But I think this is a big test to see, okay, when Iowa gets to the second weekend, how does it match up with teams of its caliber? And how does it play defense when it matters? And I think this is going to be fun.
Yeah, and the number one seed's on the table. It still is. I mean, look at this now. The net rankings, Iowa is 8th, Indiana is 5th. So, maybe one Big Ten team gets a number one seed, because you're probably looking, South Carolina and UConn are probably going to get it. Then you've got, LSU in that picture, and a lot of other good programs too. And a 2 seed's not terrible.
Yeah.
And, top 4 you host, but the better, I think it's even more important in women's basketball. The higher seed you get, the better. And that's what's still on the table here. Plus, you want to win a Big Ten championship. I know that is not important for maybe some people outside the program, but I can guarantee you the ladies in that locker room want that regular season Big Ten title. Tomorrow night is huge for that.
Yeah, it is. Because then they'll play them again, but Iowa has a challenging schedule, when they got to play at Maryland again. And
Yep.
yeah, they blasted Maryland out of the water at Carver, but it's a different environment there, and they're a good team too. I mean, they're ranked 8th for a reason. And you go on the road, and we see it in men's basketball too. It's a different world. The hoops are different, the ball is different, the texture of the ball is different. So there's some challengings there, there. And Iowa's, as we've seen, Michigan State isn't a very good team, but, they took Iowa overtime, and Iowa really struggled, but they pulled it out. And you're looking at Indiana that's won 10 games in a row, and Iowa that's won 8 in a row. And I think this is just a really fascinating matchup. And as you said, if you want to, do you really want to have to play in the Elite 8 against UConn or LSU. Not if you don't have to, because the Final Four is like a marker that if they don't win it, but if you get to the Final Four, it is a legacy-defining season. You got to the Final Four. They'll, even in Iowa basketball, they haven't done it since 1980, men's basketball, and that's something that everybody recognizes. The Elite Eight in 87 was great. They were a better team, but they didn't get to the Final Four, and that is a marker of distinction. That it's like getting the Rose Bowl back in the old days. Doesn't matter if you're 8-3 like Hayden's teams were, but you get to the Rose Bowl. That's a bigger deal than being 10-1-1 and going to the Holiday Bowl in 1990.
Yeah, no doubt. What you're doing now for Iowa women's basketball is basically just working on your resume for the rest of the season, pursuing a Big Ten regular season championship, and then getting into the conference postseason tournament and just kind of keep things rolling. You don't want bad losses. Just kind of build your resume towards that postseason, and then hopefully you get the right matchups, because you just never know. Like last year with Creighton, wasn't a good matchup for them. That was an upset. You hope to avoid things like that. For the men, Scott, tomorrow night, 6:00 Central Time, in West Lafayette. That game is on ESPN2. Fran let us know that Josh Agundale would be available tomorrow night. He's a tough matchup for Zach Edey. Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Could be. Possibly. Yeah, it's good to have some bodies to throw at that kid, because he is the clear front runner for National Player of the Year. He's just been amazing to see his development he was good last year, but he's taken his game to another level. Purdue's going to be pissed. It lost at Indiana over the weekend. Still maintain that number one ranking, but there's no doubt this is the biggest challenge remaining on the Iowa men's schedule. The game at Indiana is going to be tough as heck too, and be interesting to see what the Mike Woodson, Fran McCaffrey dynamic will be for that one. But the one in front of us now, Scott, is nobody's going to expect Iowa to win this game tomorrow night.
No, and this is one of those. This is why basketball is such a long season. You just can't it's not like football where it's all or nothing. Either you win. What you want to do is you want to play as well as you can and do what you want to do. And if you win it, fantastic. If you don't, well, you'll just move on. So I think in this case, you look at, what do they have left? Just play well. And Zach Edey, as you said, is an impossible matchup. Let's put it that way. And they are, Purdue's rebounding margin is 11.7. Iowa's is 1.8. So you're going to get out rebounded. And they always do that. Doesn't matter who, AJ Hammonds is there or whoever. But I think this is a situation where, how do you compete? Well, it's getting good shots, good looks, and taking those shots and making them. You're going to have to probably make 50+% from the field, which is going to be tough. But you can't quick shoot the ball either. You're going to have to get in transition and hope that you get high percentage shots, or you move the ball around enough on the perimeter to where you get open threes or close to it. And it still might not be enough. Mackey Arena is fantastic place to play. It's a hard place to play. This is the number one team in the country. You might lose by 10, but not play very poorly either. So I think you just take the game as it comes. You hope that you play well. But if you lose, shrug it off, move on. The one thing you don't want is Rob to get beat like by 30, and you just don't compete and you fall apart at the very beginning. I think that could be really a tough one. But because the rest of the way, at Minnesota, that absolutely is winnable. Ohio State at home should be winnable. At Northwestern and Wisconsin back-to-back, so 4 out of their next 5 are on the road. But I don't see a scenario where they can't win 4 of them. And at worst, they should go 3-2. I think they're good enough to do that.
Yeah, no business losing at Minnesota or to Ohio State at home. Ohio State has some talent, and they could get on a heater and beat you at home. But that's a game, if you play well, you should win.
Mhm.
Iowa played well at Mackey last year, had a
Yeah.
chance in that game. That was an early season game, and then beat Purdue in the Big Ten tournament. So there's evidence there. They should be confident that they can play with this team. It's a matter of going out there and doing it. And we know the size height deficit that Iowa experiences a lot because it doesn't really have a true post center in a league that has a lot of good ones. It's going to be really important for Bracha to pick his spots. If Edey gets the ball in a position that he's probably going to score anyway, I think you got to let him score and not get in foul trouble. Because if Bracha gets in foul trouble, now you're bringing in Mulvey or Gundele to face Edey, or you're putting your best scorer, most likely, in Chris Murray on him, which you don't want either. So Bracha's availability tomorrow night, to me, is going to be a huge key. When do you bring the double team? If you bring a double team, how do you recover from that? Defensive rotations, because Purdue can shoot it. It's a challenge. It's a huge challenge, but Iowa knows what it's up against. And sometimes that's half the battle, just preparing for what you're going to face and knowing what you're going to face. And then it just comes down really to execution.
Yeah. Execution, huh? I've heard that word before.
Yes.
Now, yeah. And we don't need to turn Purdue into some sort of super team. I don't know that they're there.
I don't think there is a super team in college basketball this year. I think it's going to be a wild NCAA tournament.
It's one of those things where, and maybe fans feel differently, but when you look at Purdue being number one and Matt Painter, I have a lot of respect for Matt Painter. I think he's an outstanding coach. He's had a great program for a long time. And Purdue is kind of like Iowa, where, even more so, where they've had a lot of success. They just haven't really broken through to that Final Four, not since 1980. And so if this is that year, I think you congratulate them. I mean, they're a quality program and a quality team with a great coach and a great system. That said, you want to go out and beat their ass. You did it last year in the Big Ten tournament. You can do it, on tomorrow, but it's going to be tough. There's no question. They've got to play as good of a game as they've played, not only to win, but to be in it at that place, because that place is raucous. It's awesome. I love the environment at Mackey. And they know how to work it. And Zach Edey is such a difficult matchup. It's going to be, I think you're right. The top key to me is ensuring that Bracha does not get in foul trouble, because they just don't have anybody athletic enough to match up with Edey consistently. Now, what I would do if I'm Fran is work the clock as best as you can. So let's say the ball goes out of bounds or there's a foul and there's 12:43 left in the first quarter. I sub out Bracha. I put in Bagundale and try to get him through, because he's going to be gassed. This is going to be a tough matchup physically too, but also no accidental fouls. And if your guy fouls him, so what? If it's Bagundale, if he fouls out, you're not losing anything. If Mulvey does, same thing. You just don't want to get Bracha with 2 with 12 minutes left in the first half and he sits, and then your 20-16 deficit goes to 38-24.
Purdue number 4 in the net rankings as we sit here this morning. Iowa checks in at 34. So Iowa is 7-5 in the league now, and just in a jam of humanity in the middle of this conference. It's going to be fun month, Scott, to see this kind of shake out, because everybody's kind of just jammed up there in the middle. Michigan State pulled that game out against Maryland last night. Maryland had a chance to maybe make a move, and Michigan State's like, nope, you're coming back with us. You're stuck in the middle. So
right.
Be a lot of matchups between teams with like records in the next month, and positioning for that double bye, man. in the
Yeah.
tournament is huge.
Right. Well, you look at who they've beaten and then versus who they've lost to. I mean, they've lost to everybody they've lost to has a worse record than they do. And then not only, I think all five. Yeah. I mean, the only one with a winning record in Big Ten play is Michigan State. They're 7-6, and they had a last second opportunity to sink them farther. But then you look at, there are 8 teams right now within one game of second place. I mean, Rutgers is on top and with Indiana at 8-5, but then you have Iowa, Illinois, Michigan, Northwestern, all 7-5. Then you have Maryland and Michigan State at 7-6. So this is going to be rock'em sock'em robots just to get to a double bye. Now this is where I kind of like where Iowa sits now, whereas 3 weeks ago I wasn't sure. After the Purdue game, let's figure that's a loss. The ones we said, Minnesota on the road, Ohio State at home, at Northwestern, at Wisconsin. Those 4, I mean, 3-1 at worst. Is that too optimistic? And then your final 3, Michigan State at home will be challenging, but it's doable. At Indiana will be, I would say, unlikely, but not impossible. And then Nebraska at home, you owe them, win that game. So if they go, let's say they win, they lose to Purdue, they go 3-1 in that stretch. That's 3-2. They beat Michigan State 4-2. They're 4-3 in that stretch at Indiana, and then they beat Nebraska. That puts them at 12-8. That's a good season for especially what they started with. I mean, they're 0-3. So I think that puts them in probably number 6 range in the NCAA tournament, and probably a double bye or close to it. They're either the 4 or 5 seed in the Big Ten tournament.
Yeah, ideally you want to get up at least around that 7-6 mark in the tournament. The good thing, as Scott said, tiebreaker wise, Iowa's lost to teams behind it, but it's beaten the 2 teams tied for second. They're 3-0 against Rutgers and Indiana. So that helps too. So there's so much to sort out here. It's really going to be unpredictable. It's been an unpredictable year. You get tomorrow night, it's just gravy. But if you lose, it's not the end of the world. Let's wrap up with some wrestling here, Scott. Spencer Lee is still winning. He had a tough matchup for him, at least. He didn't pin his opponent at Minnesota, which is kind of an upset when it comes to Spencer Lee this season. It was interesting to watch him and see him taking the distance, and he still looked a little winded. So I'm not sure that was a bad thing that he got pushed a little bit last Friday.
Oh, it's fine, and I think it's a good thing for him. He needed to go the distance. I mean, it was only he the previous 7 or 8 matches were either tech fall or pins, and I think it's a really good thing for him to go and get into the third period, wrestle 7 minutes, because you never know when that chance is going to happen at some point in the NCAA tournament where somebody's going to be really amped and they're not going to get taken down right away, because Spencer is so good. And all of a sudden it's going to be maybe 0-0 going to the second period. And then that's when kind of the invincibility kind of fades a little bit from Spencer, just because simply he's so good out of the gate, gets guys down and then turns them with a tilt, and all of a sudden it's 6-0, 25 seconds into a match. So it's a good thing. It was a little bit surprising to see him go the distance, but he was still well in control. I think this is fine for him, and 50th straight win, going for 4. Never happened before in Iowa history. But he's got 2 more home duels. And you want to see what Tom Brands considers as the greatest wrestler in Iowa history, which is really, I wouldn't say it's inarguable, but I think he's got a very, very strong case as the best wrestler in Iowa history. You got two more cracks, and I know all the tickets are sold out, but you can still buy them.
Yes, Michigan this Friday night at 8:00, Big Ten Network. That seems to be the standard spot for Iowa. 8:00, Big Ten Network, Friday nights. They know what draws the eyeballs and when. So number 9, Michigan, number 2, Iowa. this Friday night. And then the following Sunday, February 19th, Oklahoma State at home in the senior day final dual meet of the season. Really important time for Iowa, Scott, to kind of get themselves built up here for the Big Tens in Ann Arbor, and then the national tournament. Where's that this year?
That's Tulsa, I believe.
Yeah. Let's see, Ann Arbor. Yep, you're right. Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
That is March 16th, 17th, and 18th.
Mhm.
So we're getting to it now. And I think Penn State is far and away the favorite to win it, but Iowa's got a chance. It's got some high-end wrestlers. It's going to need some of those guys that maybe haven't been consistent enough this year to hit their stride at the right time.
Right. They're going to need, I think like you look at Real Woods and of course Spencer Lee. I think they are your Saturday night stars. And I think Spencer, I'd be surprised, very surprised if he doesn't win it, let alone get there. And Real Woods, I think, is in the same ballpark as far as getting there and maybe winning it. Beyond that, you're going to need guys to come up with big contributions. Watching Jacob Warner compete last week, it's very disappointing to me that, he got taken down with a second to go in the match. And it was 1-0. It's like, come on, man, do something here. And, that is the kind of wrestling that I know drives the Brands brothers crazy. This is why they get kicked out of the Olympics, is when it goes 7 minutes and you ride out a guy for a full period and then, you get taken down and you get rid out to where you lose your riding time, and then you get an escape, you try to hang on, and then you get taken down with a second to go. It's your fifth year. Go win. So, maybe that's the wake-up call he needs. I don't know. But that he's the type of guy. I think Cassiope is another one where, what you do is you look at your seed and meet or exceed it. And if they can do that, there's going to be some upsets. And then, and then beat Penn State head-to-head when you can. Because that's really, Penn State is the favorite. Penn State beat Iowa head-to-head. Penn State's the better team. They got more superstars, but Iowa has a chance, as you said.
Starts on Friday, or continues on Friday, I should say. Michigan at home, 8:00, Big Ten Network. Continue to build towards March. That's what all the winter teams are doing. Basketball's, men's and women's, and wrestling and football. I'm okay if I don't hear any more Brian Ferentz news for a while. I'd be okay with that, Scott.
Yeah, me too. I on Monday I said he's kind of like Kaiser Soze, it's nameless, faceless guy that's like a ghost story to journalists, and I get it, but it's just been so damn all-consuming for so long now, really from the 2021 season on, and it heated up during the summer, and then it just magnified and blasted out of orbit against South Dakota State and beyond, and then this offseason, and now this, and it's like, we're going to report the news as it happens, but it's also like after a while, you just want to give it a rest, move on, think about something else, because, I know when I wrote on Sunday, I wrote about the new look offensive line and just how everything is, it's like, hey, this might work. And here's the reason why things didn't work before. And here's why it might work this time. And my, first couple of comments were, how can you write about the offense improving without firing Brian Ferentz? And the other one was, well, you're just a cheerleader anyway for the Ferentz. And I'm like, what do you want? It's just, it'd be nice to write about something else, and then if the offense sucks in the fall, we can hop back on that train, and we're already going to be more skeptical, even if we don't need to be. But I think it's going to be, it's just all consuming at this point.
So everybody has time now. Got the next 6-7 months to wrap your mind around what's going to happen in the fall. Prepare yourself, and when it comes around, you'll be ready for Iowa football. We all will be. But Scott and I will be back next week. We'll recap this basketball and wrestling action. I just have a feeling there's going to be some football to talk about, because there's always football to talk about, and we'll do that as well. We forget anything, I always lean on you to let me know if I forgot to talk about anything.
Now, you know what? I think we've hit just about everything. And there's the combine. The invitations were just announced. Let me get to what Iowa got here. Let me scroll down.
When is the combine?
It's the end of the month, and I'll be there all week. It'll be delightful. Iowa had 5 guys, as maybe we might have expected: Jack Campbell, Sam Laporta, Kayvon Merriweather, Riley Moss, Lucas Van Ness.
Makes sense. All of those guys make sense.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I would say, based on, we're already working ahead on our NFL draft stuff, because I kind of switch over to that. And I know I told one person yesterday, I can't wait to work about NFL draft as opposed to Brian Ferentz is my main beat. But Lucas Van Ness will be a first rounder for sure. Jack Campbell, Sam Laporta will be second/early third rounders. Riley Moss has a chance to be in that realm. He had a really good week at Mobile, maybe fourth at worst. And Merriweather has a chance to get drafted. He was at the Senior Bowl. So, and then after that, I think they're probably all free agents, whether it's Monty Potabom or Seth Benson, John Wagner. I don't know if I'm forgetting anybody, but by and large, I think that's really what you want to, that there'll be 4 or 5 getting drafted, and that's pretty good.
Yeah, no doubt. Look forward to talking more NFL draft as we move here through February into March, and then up to the draft. We'll get more information coming our way on that, and spring football will be here before we know it. So we'll be back next week, probably at our regularly scheduled time on Thursday, but stay tuned. I usually try to get something out there on the Twitterverse to let folks know when we're going to record. But we wanted to thank all of our sponsors, and especially everybody out there for listening. We appreciate you guys doing that, and we will be back to talk to you next week. Say goodbye, Scott.
Goodbye, Scott.